All right. Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Tonight we are learning Maseches Eruvin Daf Tzadi Daled. To make my life a drop easier for preparing on Thursday, we're going to be going up to and about a third of the way down on Daf Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph. Thank you for putting up with me. I'm just learning how to do this, so I feel like a rookie. We're going to push on to Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph a little. We're doing Tzadi Dal. We're starting on the bottom of Tzadi Gimel Amud Beis at Boi Rav Hoshia at about 12 lines up. So let's get started. Rav Hoshia was bothered by a question in Amora, and he was bothered by the following question. Boi Rav Hoshia, Diyurin haboyin b'Shabbos ma'u she'i asur. What happens if you have new visitors on Shabbos? Now Rashi gives us context of this question of these Diyurin. Bottom of Tzadi Gimel Amud Beis. Bottom of Tzadi Gimel Amud Beis, about 12 lines from the bottom of the page, and it says Boi Rav Hoshia, and he says, During Abayim b'Shabbos, if we have new visitors on Shabbos, Mahu Shei Asur, do they cause a problem for Eruv? What is the context here? So Rashi, just to our left, about a centimeter down, Dibur Hamaschel During Abayim b'Shabbos, Kigon, Kosel Shebein Beis Chatzeros Shenofal b'Shabbos. The case is not someone coming from out of town. That we spoke about in the Masechta already. We said even if you're at your daughter's house in the same city, the Jew doesn't come back home, the guy does come back home. We've learned about that already. But what about where the fence falls? So the Gemara attempts an answer. Amar Rav Chizda, Tashma. Let's see. We learned in our Mishnah, the one that we're currently working on. Chatzer gdola shenifritza l'ktana. If you have a large chatzer and the wall breaks down into the ktana, hagdola muteres v'ktana asura. We see that these new diurin, quote unquote, from the ktana, they have a problem. So we have a reason why the bigger one is muter, but we do see that there's a problem with the ktana. So Amar Rabba, no, wait a minute. You can't say that this is a mari makom to support the idea that the diurin habayim b'Shabbos are going to cause a problem. Why not? Because Amar Rabba, Amar, I could say, maybe in the case of Chatzer Gdola Shenifritza L'Ktana, maybe that wall broke down during the day. So Amar Le Abaye, you're very right. Lo tema mar Amar. You shouldn't say, I should say. Ella vaday mi be'ojam nifritza. I'm positive that you're correct. That the answer should be that our Mishnah of Chatzer Gdola Shenifritza L'Ktana that happened before Shabbos started. How do I know? Because Dahamar hu de'amar, you, Rabba, you're the one who asked the following question of your Rabbim. Boi mineme Rav Huna uvai mineme Rav Yehuda. You asked from your Rabbim, Irev derech haPesach v'nistam haPesach. If a person makes an eruv through a doorway and there's an avalanche and the door gets covered on Shabbos, or Irev derech chalon v'nistam hachalon, or you made an eruv through a window and the window gets covered off. Mahu. What's the din of that eruv on Shabbos? The Amruli Shabbos Kevan Shehutra Hutra. No, we learned that Shabbos doesn't get ruined. So you can't tell me that our Mishnah is talking about on Shabbos, and it certainly doesn't answer the question of Rav Hoshia. So Rav Hoshia's answer remains unanswered. So now the Gemara says, let's try asking this question from a different generation. Itmar, 3 lines from the bottom. Kosel shebein shtei chatzeros shenofal. You have a wall that fell down between 2 chatzeros. Rashi, an important Rashi that gives us some important context here. The first of the longer lines of Rashi. Rashi says, Dibur hamaschel kosel shebein shtei chatzeros shelo haya pesach beinehem. There was no door between them. V'lo irvu bo yachad, and there was no eruv between them. V'nofal. That's our context. Good. Back in the Gemara, here we see that where this wall fell between 2 chatzeros, Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Rav Omar ein metaltel and boela b'dalet amos. If that wall falls, you have lost your private space. You can only walk up to Dalet Amos. Ushmuel Amar, turning to the top of Tzadi Dalet Amar Aleph, Zeh metaltel ad ikr mechitza, v'zeh metaltel ad ikr mechitza. You're allowed to carry up to where the wall was, but you're not limited to Dalet Amos. You don't need to build a wall. You're allowed to carry up to where the wall theoretically was. Okay. So then the Gemara tells a little bit of a story. A very well-known line in Shas. This shita of Rav Lav beferish itmar, he did not say explicitly. In fact, we'll see that he just gave a little head nod to explain his shita. It was inferred itmar from the following story. Rav and Shmuel were sitting in the Chatzer. And then between the Chatzer that they were in the next one, Nafal Guda de Beni Beni. And then while they were sitting there, the wall fell. Amar lehu Shmuel. Shmuel said, Shkulu glima, go take a coat, go take a garment, negidu be, and hang it up so that we can separate the mechitzas. So this should bother us already. Shmuel said, top line, you don't have to do anything. The Gemara is going to ask that. And then at that moment, when Rav heard Shmuel say that, his body language gave everything away. What did he say? He said, Ahadrinu Rav la'ape. Rav turned his head. Rav turned his face away. And the Meforshim understand that he was doing so in disagreement with the Shita of Shmuel. Amar lahu. So Shmuel said to his people who were helping him, to his Meshamshin, Amar lahu Shmuel, ikapid Abba. Abba, of course, is a reference to Rav. Ikapid Abba, if he's strict, shkulu hem yane v'kitru, but take his belt and help to tie up the mechitza. So the Meforshim point out this line is a milsa b'dichusa. This is like a little dig that Shmuel is giving to Rav. So now the Gemara asks on this story two questions. Number one, Ula Shmuel lama liha. Why did Shmuel tell his Meshamshin to build a wall? After all, top line of the page, Ha'amar zemetaltel adekar mechitza, zemetaltel adekar mechitza. You don't need to do anything. You can walk all you want. You just can't go past the line. So I don't understand what the problem is. Why did he have to do anything? Shmuel, answers the Gemara, Shmuel avad litzniyusa be'alma. You're right. Ladina, he did not need it. He just wanted to have some privacy in the yard. So he hung up. He asked his Meshamshim, his Talmidim, to hang up a little bit of a separation. Rav, I don't understand. Rav, you shook your head in disagreement. If you hold that putting up that fence is usher, or walking more than Dalet Amos, most critically, is forbidden, then I don't understand. Lay malay, open your mouth, say something. You can disagree with Shmuel. You argue with him all over Shas. I don't understand what the problem is. Says the Gemara, an idea for our generation, Asrei de Shmuel Hava. This was not the place for him to argue. He was in Naharda. He was near the yeshiva of Shmuel. Shmuel is the posek. Rav keeps his mouth shut. Oh, but then if you can't talk, if you're not allowed to say your shita that you disagree with Shmuel, then ihachi my time ahadrinu la'ape. Why did you let your feelings show on your face to turn and say like, oh, he doesn't? Why would he ever hold that way? Why did you give your feelings away? I don't understand. You let everybody know how you felt. So answers the Gemara, because he was trying to thread the needle. I didn't want people to think that I held like Shmuel. Shmuel's allowed to paskin how he wants. Everyone in this city should follow Shmuel. I happen to not agree. I'm not going to speak up. It's not my city. But what I am going to do is I'm going to make the facial expression to let people know that I don't hold this way. And that was the pshara, the compromise that Rav held to. That brings us to the next Mishnah, about a quarter of the way down on Tzadik Daled Amud Aleph. Let's continue. Chatzer shenifritzal l'reshus harabim. If you have a chatzer, your personal backyard, and the wall breaks down and it opens into the masses, into the public thoroughfare, it is a reshus harabim. So then, machlokes tanaim. Hamachnis mitocha l'reshus hayachid. Someone who carries from within that chatzer to a different reshus hayachid, o me reshus hayachid l'socha, says Rabbi Eliezer, chayev. Wow. If the wall breaks down from your chatzer into a reshus harabim, your chatzer just became just like the reshus harabim. That's the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim Mormon, they argue, mitocha l'reshus harabim, from within the chatzer, which now is broken and open to the reshus harabim. If you carry from that space into a reshus harabim, o me reshus harabim l'socha pater mipnei shekikarmelis. That would not be problematic. That would not be problematic. That would only be a karmelis. So basically, to repeat the machlokes in the Mishnah, if a wall breaks down to your chatzer and it opens to reshus harabim, so the Tanakama Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion that your now broken wall makes your chatzer reshus harabim doraisa, and the Chachamim say no, it's not a reshus harabim doraisa. It is a karmelis, reshus harabim derabana. Good. Let's start with the Gemara here. 1/3 of the way down. The Gemara says as follows. Rabbi Eliezer, I don't understand. Mishum de nifritza l'reshus harabim. Have you love reshus harabim? I don't understand. Just the fact that your walls open to a reshus harabim means that it is a new reshus harabim midoraisa. Why does it mean that? Lav dafka. It could be 100 different things, but it doesn't have to be reshus harabim doraisa. That's a very strong shita. So it says the Gemara, two possibilities. Here's answer number one. Yes, in fact, it does. And Rabbi Eliezer l'taime, there's precedent for Rabbi Eliezer to hold such a thing. What is the precedent? It's a brisa. The Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. The Tana, Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabim sheberu derech la'atman. If you are in someone's field and all of a sudden you find a path that people start taking regularly, you start seeing the footprints in the grass, right? So then mashe beru. At this point, now that they've clarified that this path is being used by the Rabbim, now it becomes part of the Rabbim, and Rashi highlights that the owner of that field cannot build a fence around this spot anymore because it's being used by the Rabbim. which means it's kind of like the squatter's rule. Like you sit there long enough, it kind of becomes yours. You walk enough on this guy's property, it's so close to the edge of the public domain, so it kind of becomes that. So it says Gemara, Eini, is that true? Really? Is that what's going on in our Mishnah? The Amar Rav Gidal Amar Rav. Rav said in commentary to that brisa, that's only if you lost your place in that field, and that's how you ended up walking in this path. But if you want to say that that's what's going on in regards to our case of Chatzar, we're trying to learn from this case of the Sadeh. But if you're saying that's what's going on in our case of the Chatzar, no. Reb Chanina says in our case, by the case of Chatzar, the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, their machlokas is up to but not including the Mechitza. So that can't be this case because the part of the Sadeh that we're talking about is right on the edge. So that can't be. So says Gemara, you're right. Ema, the line of Rabbi Chanina was mistaken. Ema al makom mechitza machlokes. Their only machlokes is by the only space of the mechitza. So in other words, now we have a better understanding of the machlokes in our Mishnah. We asked, the Gemara asked, hey, Rabbi Eliezer, you're saying that this makom is now, that this, when a chatzar, its wall breaks down into Rishus Harabim, you want to say that it becomes a Rishus Harabim Doraisa, that the chatzar becomes a Rishus Harabim. That doesn't really work out. So he says, yeah, we do have precedent. It's from that case of Sheberu Derech La'atzman, and it's only the edge by where the wall was. So namely, the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, according to this first answer of the Gemara, is only where the wall was. So let's say that the wall was 15 feet wide and 4 tfachim wide. That's where there's a machlokas Rishonim. If that one spot is a makom that's a Rishus Harabim Dorais or Derabanan. Good. Viva Yisema, halfway down, right in the middle of the page, second possible answer. Viva Yisema, really, our machlokas is simply a machlokas about Tzidei Rishus Harabim. Viva Yisema, B'Tzidei Rishus Harabim Kamiflage. The Rabbi Eliezer, Savar, Tzidei Rishus Harabim, Kirishus Harabim Damo. Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion that if you have a little nook or cranny, a little corner that kind of juts off, a little cutout, that the Rishus Harabim, it's like you can imagine like a small little enclave where someone may keep their garbage cans enclosed, but it's part of the Rishus Harabim. So that's a little Tzidei Rishus Harabim. So maybe our Mishnah is really talking about Tzidei Rishus Harabim. Rabbi Eliezer, who's strict, says that when the wall breaks down into the Chatzar, that Chatzar just became like Tzidei Rishus Harabim. And therefore he holds that it's a Rishus Harabim Deraisa because Tzidei Rishus Harabim are like Rishus Harabim. The Rabbanan, the rabbis of our Mishnah who hold that this Chatzar is only a Carmelis, the Rabbanan Savre, Tzidei Rishus Harabim lav Kirshus Harabim tamo. That's incorrect. The Tzidei Rishus Harabim, or in our Mishnah, the cutout of our Chatzar, because now the Chatzar, the wall broke down to the Rishus Harabim, lav Kirshus Harabim tamo, just a machlokes in Tzidei Rishus Harabim. So maybe that's what our Mishnah is really arguing about. So says the Gemara, wait a minute. The liflog, but Tzidei Rishus Harabim be'alma. Why such a weird case? Stop giving me this case where there's a chatzar and the wall broke down into the Rishus Harabim. Maybe we should treat it like a little alcove, a little bubble off of a Rishus Harabim. Just say the case. Just say that your machlokas is tzidei Rishus Harabim. Why this convoluted case? V'liflog b'tzidei Rishus Harabim be'alma. Says Gemara, we can't do that. We had to teach, assuming answer 2 is correct, we had to teach that the din, the machlokas of tzidei Rishus Harabim, we had to teach it in this context. Why? Because if we had only taught a pure case, what would the Mishnah have said? Tzidei Rishus Harabim, Rabbi Eliezer, Omer Chayev, and the Rabbanan say Pater. That's what it would have said. But if we would have had that, we would have had a problem. Hava Amrinan, we would have then said, Ki pligi Rabbanan alei de Rabbi Eliezer. When do the rabbis argue on Rabbi Eliezer? Only Hanemili Hechadika Chifufe. It was commonplace that in the times of old, that they would have these little bumpers in the street, a little border to distinguish between where their wagons would go versus where people would walk. Those were called chifufe, like our modern day curb. So because a lot of these places, the Tzidei Rishus Harabim, were off the middle of the road, just a little bit off to the side, above the curb, above the chifufe. So then says the Gemara, Hani Mili, we might have thought that the Rabbanan only argue in our Mishnah on Rabbi Eliezer, only where there is that delineation, that curb, those pegs that say where the wagon goes versus where the people should walk. But had there not been such a distinction, Ema module, maybe modu plural lay, they to him, maybe the Rabbanan would have agreed and just matched the shear of Rabbi Eliezer, ka mashmalan. And basically, the reason why we had to teach this second answer of Tzidei Rishus Harabim in this context is to make sure that we knew the scope of the machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, that even where there's no chifufe, the Rabbanan would still argue on the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. So says the Gemara, wait a minute. You're saying the machlokes is only by the edge, it's only by the mechitza. You said from within, right? Our answer number one is that the only space we're talking about is under where the fence fell. But v'mitocha, you said from within the field. That's what our Mishnah says. So it says the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer said mitoch, but it said mitocha from the middle of the field. Why did he say that? So answers the Gemara, because Aidi de Amur Rabbanan mitocha, because the Rabbanan, the Chachamim were using the language of mitocha, therefore Omar Ihu Nami mitocha. So Rabbi Eliezer was just matching language, but really Rabbi Eliezer was only concerned about the space where the mechitza actually fell, the actual square footage, the actual footprint of the wall. So it says the Gemara, V'Rabbanan, why were you using the language of mitocha? Omar Rabbi Eliezer, Tzidei Rishus Harabim. They were talking about these little cutouts of the sides of the road. Umehadru le inhu, and you responded mitocha from the middle of the field, from the middle of the chatzer. You're not even talking about the same space. You gotta get on the same page to have the machlokes. Says the Gemara, 12 lines from the bottom, a few lines before the Mishnah. Hachi ka'amri le Rabbanan, the Rabbi Eliezer. No, this was a very carefully chosen set of words by the Rabbanan. This is what they're saying. Milo kamodis, don't you agree? Milo kamodis lan, Rabbi Eliezer, the Rabbanan say, wouldn't you agree with us? Heicha detiltel mitocha the Rishus Harabim, that if someone were to carry from this chatzer, where the wall broke down from the chatzer to the Rishus Harabim, ume Rishus Harabim lesocha, and someone carried from outside in the Rishus Harabim into the middle of this field, the pater, mipnei shu karmelis. Wouldn't you agree that in the depth of the field that it's a karmelis? Tzidei nami lo shna. So too, right by the edge of the field, right by the footprint of where the wall fell, it should also be a karmelis. That's why the Rabbanan in our Mishnah use the language of mitocha. So how does Rabbi Eliezer answer? Rabbi Eliezer, what would you answer to the question of the Rabbanan? They want to make a comparison between deep into the chutzner where it's a karmelis versus the footprint of the wall, which is right at the edge. Says Rabbi Eliezer, no, come on. It's not even comparable. Hasa by the depth in mitocha, in the heart of the chutzner, lo kadarsa the rabbin. People are not walking all the way into your chutzner and coming out. But hacha, by the footprint of the wall, it's right by the rishus harabim. And therefore, hacha kadarsa le rabbim, and therefore each of their shitas are kept respectable, are kept viable, and that remains the machlokas between them about the footprint of the wall. And that brings us to the next Mishnah, another case of a chatzar shenifritz al rishus harabim, a little bit different. And let's get into this next Mishnah. 6-7 lines from the bottom, Daf Tzadi Daled Amud Aleph. Chatzar shenifritz al rishus harabim mishnei ruchoseh. You have a chatzar, your yard, no roof, right? Your yard, and two of the walls break down from two directions. We don't know which two directions. We'll see in the Gemara what the details are. V'chein, and similarly, bayis, a bayis typically does have a roof, right? Our houses, thank God, usually have a roof. V'chein, bayis shenifritz mishnei ruchosav. Similarly, a house. Why do we need both cases? We'll see why. They have different dinim. Mishtei ruchosav. V'chein, and similarly, mavui shenidlu korosav olechayad, or a mavui from which was removed the koros or the lechi, which enabled carrying. Those are missing now. Mutarim be'oso Shabbos. If those things happen on Shabbos, again, your chutzner, two of the walls break down. Your house, two of the walls break down. The mavui, the korah and the lechi fall away. So it's mutter for that Shabbos. V'asurim lasid lavo. He is straddling two worlds here. Really, it seems from the Tanakama, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda seems to be of the opinion that there's something wrong with this space now, but it's fine for Shabbos. It's just not okay for next Shabbos. Okay, he kind of straddling two worlds. Okay, Rabbi Yossi Omer, no way. This is the classical version of the Miman of Shach that we use colloquially and casually in learning. Miman of Shach. Rabbi Yossi Omer, imutar la'oso Shabbos mutar lasid lavo. If you want to tell me that there's nothing wrong with the mechitza, so much so that you can use it for the rest of Shabbos, then mutar lasid lavo. Then you don't need to fix it. V'imutar lasid lavo. And if it's not going to work for the future, then it should be asur right now. What is this middle of the road? You're like twilight a little bit. You're saying it's mutter for this Shabbos, but not for next Shabbos. This Mishnah is one of the Mari Mekomos used in the discussion about what happens when an Eruv falls down on Shabbos. Do you open your mouth or do you not? And of course, we know it's a very well-known idea here that is played out where we say mutav shushogig and val tumazidin. It's better sometimes not to share Because if everyone's out with their babies in strollers, people are literally walking down the street carrying their talis bags and svarim, and maybe they have a mask in their pocket with our current culture. So what are you going to announce it to everyone? So we say mutiv shushogin v'altim azivin. So that's very similar to this opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi will hear nothing of it. If by next Shabbos it wouldn't be good, then you shouldn't finish carrying this Shabbos either. Asurin le'osa Shabbos. Says the Gemara, what in the world are the details of this case here? But my askinan, what are we talking about here? Let's try to understand the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda had said in our Mishnah that if two of the walls fell down in a chutzner, two of the walls in a house, that you're still allowed to carry for the rest of Shabbos. So says the Gemara, b'may askina, what's the case? Ilema be'eser, if these walls broke and the horizontal break is less than 10 amos, we know that that's called a pesach, not a pirza. So then, ma'ishna miruach achas, damrin on pischahu, then why does the Mishnah have to bring a case of two walls? If it's a pesach on one wall, it's a pesach on both walls. So that doesn't make sense. Mishtei ruchos nami pischahu. Ella, it must be, says the Gemara, that it's beyeser me'eser, that we're talking about a case where it is a pirza, not a pesach, where the walls broke in a width greater than 10 amos. That's not viable. But then there, says the Gemara, but that doesn't work either. Ihachi, if that's true, afilu me'ruach achas nami. If you have a pirza, forget about two walls, even one wall would ruin your capacity to carry. So why does our Mishnah have two walls that fell down? And what was the case? Was it less than 10 or more than 10? Both of them have problems. Answers the Gemara, last line, Tzadi Dalet Amud Aleph, Amar Rav. Rav says, Le'olam be'eser. Really what we are talking about is that the pirza is less than 10. Oh, so then if that's the case, then why don't we just allow ourselves to carry? It should be a Pesach. Ukigon, what are the details of this broken wall, of these broken walls? Ukigon shenifritza bekeren zavis. The pischa bekeren zavis la avde inshe. What was the case of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah? You've got two walls of a chutzner that fall down. And Rav says that the breaks in the walls are less than 10. Fine. So if it's less than 10, then it's a Pesach. Why can't I carry? Says Rav, explaining Rabbi Yehuda, because what's happening in our Mishnah is that if you have a square like this, right? Or let's just use this thing here. This is a square, approximately. Here's where it broke. It broke on an angle like this. So now, if I could have gotten rid of this, it's just totally broken in. Two of your walls, the bottom and the side wall, this is where it cracked in these two places. So you've ruined two walls. Technically, it's less than 10, so therefore it's a Pesach. But what does the Gemara say right before the two dots here? The pischa bekeren zavis la'avdin inshi. It's not a normal type of Pesach. So therefore, says Rabbi Yehuda, I'm willing to let it go for Shabbos. I'm willing to let it go because it's technically a Pesach. It's less than 10 amos. So it's a Pesach. It's fine for Shabbos. But by next Shabbos, you have to fix it. Because it's Pesach to la'avdin inshi. That explains Rabbi Yehuda's seemingly compromised approach. The Chain says, the Gemara second line, Bayis shenifrat mishtei ruchosav. A house where two of the walls fell down, says the Gemara, same question as before, but with a different halachic application. What happens if you're missing a wall in a house? We would say, who cares? Pitik or yor d'sosem, right? If you have a house and you have a ceiling, and your ceiling is a flat ceiling, pitik or yor d'sosem. So says the Gemara, my shname ruach achas tamrin pitik or yor d'sosem. Even if we only had one wall that was broken, we would have solved the problem with pitikra. No problem. Mishtei ruchos nami lema pitikra yor d'sosem. Again, why does the Mishnah need to reference both walls? It's not necessary to reference both walls, because if we have the din of pitikra yor d'sosem, you could be missing three walls. It's still mutter to carry in that house. So the Gemara is stuck, doesn't understand. So the Gemara is going to present two answers, one in the name of Rav and one in the name of Shmuel. Amrei debei Rav mishmei de Rav. What does Rav say? Similar answer as before, but with a twist. Kigon shenifratz bekeren zavis. It is correct that it was broken on the sides, because otherwise, if it's just a broken wall, then we could solve it by saying it's a Pesach. So it had to be a Pesach in the corner like before. However, the kiruyo ba'alachson, the roof runs on an angle. And because the roof runs on an angle, there's no pitikra yor d'sosem. So let me just get a little example here. So if this is my house, and this is my roof, if my roof is flat like this, so we would say pitikra. What if my roof is elevated? There's no pitikra. So Rav says, why is it that we're dealing with this strange case in our Mishnah of two walls in our house? Because number one, and an important feature of this case, is that the case of the house in the Mishnah, when it says v'chein bayis, where a house is missing two walls, it's where, again, similarly, like we saw, it was a cut on the angle of at a corner. And number two is that the ceiling was angled, and therefore we did not have pitikri v'sosem. That is how Rav answers this question. Answer number two, how do we understand our case about the house in our Mishnah? Ushmuel amar, afilu biyeser me'eser. Even if the pirza was greater than 10, it's not a Pesach anymore, it's a 12 amma break, okay? If that's the case, why does our Mishnah deal with two walls? If you have a pirza, if you have something greater than 10 amos, you don't have anything. So then why then, how does that work? Says the Gemara, mishum bayis, because it's a house. Says the Gemara, what kind of answer is that? It's still problematic. You can't just call it a house and say that it's a problem. You still have a pirza. It's still greater than 10 amos. Says the Gemara, my shna meruach achas de'amrinan pitikra yod v'sosem mibeis ruchos nami pitikra yod v'sosem. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. You should just say pitikra. If the fact that it's a pirza is irrelevant in a house. You're saying, Shmuel, it's a house. What good does that do? You still have pitikra, and it should still be mutter. So how do we understand our Mishnah? Says the Gemara, that's question one against Shmuel. And here's question two against Shmuel, more fundamental. Visu, and furthermore, mi'isle l'Shmuel pitikra yor b'sosem. We already learned this. Shmuel doesn't hold of it. Where did we learn it? Ve'al itmar, achsad Rabbi Bika. We learned this on Shabbos. Achsad Rabbi Bika, that if you have this roofed thing on poles in a bika, in a valley. So Rav Amar mutar l'taltal b'kula. Rav said that under that roof you're allowed to carry. Shmuel Amar ein metaltal in ba'al b'dalad amos. Shmuel was strict. Why? We saw in Shabbos. Why was Shmuel strict there? Because he didn't allow for pitikra. So you're trying to tell me that in our Mishnah we have a pirza that's greater than 10. What does that even mean? You don't even hold to pitikra. You're so same. So how can you tell me that this is going to work? So these are two kashas against Shmuel. It says the Gemara halfway down, Tzadi Dalad Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, hello kasha. Your question against Shmuel about whether or not he holds a pitikra, not a good question. And we learned this distinction then. What is the difference between Rav and Shmuel? Hello kasha. Ki leslay. When does Shmuel not hold the pitikra yod v'sosem? Bidalid. When all four walls need to drop with the yesod of pitikra yod v'sosem. So you have 4 posts and a roof. Says Shmuel, no, only Dalad Amos under that. That's the Achsad Rabbi Bika according to Shmuel. He says that that's an insufficient pitikra yod v'sosem case because the application of pitikra yod v'sosem doesn't apply when you need all 4 walls. However, aval b'shalosh, if what you needed was 3 islay, then that would work. Okay, so we solved the problem of Shmuel not being a good Mari Makom for this. Okay, good. Mikol Makom Kasha, we still don't understand how he would apply his case in the house of greater than 10. So let's see what the Gemara says. So says the Gemara, just like Rav would have answered, and he did answer, that the house was dealing with a case where the walls were broken at a corner, where 2 parts of a wall where they met at the corner were broken, and the ceiling was an angle. Hachanami says Shmuel, I'm going to say a little different than Rav. Hachanami kegon shenifratz bekeren zavis. I agree with you that it's cut at the corner, but Shmuel doesn't agree with the roof being on an angle. And we'll see why shortly. He says that the roof is broken down in a funny way. Take a look at the picture that you have in Rashi, where you see this kind of jutting shape. You guys have that in your Rashis, the jutting shape Rashi? So the wall cut at the top left corner, but it cut in a funny way. And in that case, you cannot do pitikra. In that case, you cannot do pitikra. It doesn't work in those cases. See Rashi at length as to why that is the case. Okay, so that's how Rav and Shmuel answer up our Mishnah. Rav says that our Mishnah, when it's talking about a bias, when it's talking about a house, it's talking about where the corner, where it meets right here, it broke here, and that the roof is on an angle, so there's no pitikra. Shmuel says the wall broke in the same way, but what we have on the roof is not big enough, or what the break in the roof was done in such a way where we cannot use pitikra, and that's where we have the machlokas in our Gemara. Shmuel lo amar kirav, we're 2/3 of the way down. Tzadi Dalad Amud Beis. Shmuel lo amar kirav. Why didn't Shmuel say like Rav's answer that the roof was on an angle? Doesn't Shmuel agree that if the roof is on an angle, we don't say pitikra yod v'sosem? This kakameni case. Look at this picture. Whose houses break like this? It's way more likely to have a sloped roof. So why was Shmuel so dafka not holding Rav Shita? Says the Gemara, Shmuel Amar Karav, because Alach so lok tani. The Mishnah doesn't say that the roof was at an angle. Rav made a new kimta that the roof was at an angle, but maybe, but it's not what the Mishnah says. And Shmuel's like, we got to stick within the terms of the deal. It doesn't say Alach so in the Mishnah. We're not using it. The Rav lo Amar Kishmuel. Why didn't Rav say like Shmuel? Because in Cain havyale achsadra. Because if the roof looked like what it looked like in this picture of Rashi, Rav would still call that an achsadra, and it would be mutter for Rav l'taime to Amar achsadra mutter l'taltel b'kula. We know Rav says you can carry in an achsadra. How do we know that? We'll quote it again, twice on the same page, to Itmar, because we learned achsadra b'bika Rav Amar mutter l'taltel b'kula v'shmuel Amar in metaltel ba ela be'arba amos. Rav Amar mutter l'taltel b'kula. Rav says, why can you carry in an achsadra? Because Amrin and Pitikar Yod v'sosein. This case that Rashi draws up on behalf of Shmuel, where the roof was cut in a funny way, Rav says we'd still say Pitikra. Shmuel doesn't for his own reasons, but Rav says we would still use it. Shmuel Amar ein metaltalin ba arba amos lo amrinan ein metaltalin ba el arba amos lo amrinan Pitikra yod v'sosein. So that explains. I'll just review because it's a little confusing, but I'll review what we've learned in this section. The case in our Mishnah about a bias. Why do we say that house is still good for Shabbos? Because it's not a glut case. Rav says that the case is talking about where there was the cut of the corner of the house. That's where the wall fell down. And Rav says we would have said Pitikra, but the case was where the roof was sloped, so we can't. So technically it's a Pesach. We'll let it go for Shabbos. But by next week, you have to fix it. That's how he would explain Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah. Shmuel says, yes, the wall was cut here, but the roof was cut in a funny way. And therefore, we don't say Pitikra Yod B'Soseim. And they don't hold like each other. Shmuel doesn't like that Rav said Alachson. And Rav doesn't like that Shmuel has this weird case because Rav would still say it's an Achsadra, and it's still mutter than to use Pitikra. And that's a brief summary of the last 30 lines of Gemara. That brings us to the bottom of the page, 4 lines from the bottom. We're going to do a little bit more and still get you to Mariv. I just wanted to sneak in a little bit more before tomorrow's daf. Says the Gemara, this case of Achsadra, what are the details? We've been discussing our Mishnah, right? If we were to look back one amud to the bottom of Tzadi Daled Amud Aleph, we were analyzing the case of Chatzar Shenifritza. In these cases, how big of a gap was it? So we're going to do the same thing by Achsadra. Says the Gemara, the Eser Kule Alma Lo Pligi. Everyone agrees in a case of Achsadra that had the break in the Achsadra, had the opening in the Achsadra been less than 10, everyone agrees. Kule Alma Lo Pligi. Everyone agrees. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi, 5 lines from the bottom of the page in the Rashis. Because even without Pitikra, even Shmuel would agree. It's just a Pesach. You don't even need to trigger the din. So that's why the Gemara says version 1 is that there is no machlokes Rav and Shmuel when the 2 posts that hold up the Achsadra are less than 10 amos. That's easy. But ki pligi be yeser me'eser. Rav and Shmuel only argue where there's more than 10, where Rav would allow for Pitikra and Shmuel won't. So Rav who allows Pitikra, you can carry everywhere. Shmuel who says no Pitikra, you only get Daled Amos. But V'ika de Amre, and a more complicated approach, V'ika de Amre, B'yeser Kule Alma Lo Pligi. Everyone agrees that if the opening in the Achsadra is more than 10 Tvachim, there's no machlokes there either. Even Rav would agree you only get Daled Amos. Where do they argue? Ki pligi be'eser. The machlokes is within 10. A little bit more difficult to understand, but nevertheless. And let's see how this applies to the following case. Hold on one second. Which of these 2 versions, which of these 2 possible machlokos, that the case of the Achsadra, the machlokes is when there is more than 10, or maybe the machlokes is only when there's less than 10. V'ha de Amar Rav Yehuda, turning to the top of Tzadi Hamad Aleph, Kore Arba Matir B'Churba. We know, and we've learned a couple of times in this Masechta already, that if you are in a churba and above you there is a beam that is 4 tfachim wide, you can carry directly underneath. Arba Matir B'Churba. V'Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Baravuha Korah Dalid Matir B'Mayim. As well, if there is a korah above water, water is normally a carmelis, and if you have the beam above you that's 4 tefachim wide, you can carry there too money. So who would that work with? Which language would that work with from the bottom of the page? Which version? The machlokes of where the machlokes is only where there's 10 or more, or less than 10. So says the Gemara. Had it been that you were talking about where there's less than 10, no one would have argued that everyone would be on the same page there. But had it been that you said that the machlokes Rav and Shmuel was where it was where the machlokes was be'eser, then it must be that this shita holds like Rav because they allow for it. Obviously, that only works according to Rav. So then the Gemara, one more suggestion for the evening, and then we will stop at the 2 dots in about eight lines or so. Lema, Abaye v'Rava beplugta de Rava, Shmuel kamiflage. Maybe Abaye and Rava have the same machlokes about Pitikr Yor v'Sosein as do Rav and Shmuel. Again, a couple of generations apart. Rav and Shmuel were early Amoraim. Abaye and Rava were 4th century already. So maybe 100, 200 years later, they're having the same exact machlokes, 150 years later. Lema Abaye v'Rava beplugta de Rava Shmuel kamiflage. De Itmar, we had this case as well. Sikech al gabe achsadra sheyesh la petzimin. If you have, you want to put tzchach on top of an achsadra, on top of some type of rafters, sheyesh la petzimin. Rashi, sheyesh la petzimin, first Rashi on the page. Amudin kavuin b'mechitzoseha. They are fixed parts of the wall. Pachos migimel. All of the beams are within 3 tfachim from one another. I'm like envisioning the railing on my porch, where all of the uprights, it's above 10 tfachim. All the uprights are certainly within 10 tfachim. They're within 3 tfachim. It's nothing. It's a few inches. It's maybe a tefach. They're very close to one another. So there we'd say kshera. Ein la psimin. What if there were no psimin? What if there were none of those uprights? So now we need to rely on pitikra. We don't have a wall. So says the Gemara, Abaye Amar Kshera, the Rava Amar Psula. So maybe this machlokes Abaye and Rava is the same as Rav and Shmuel. Abaye Amar Kshera. Why would Abaye say that it's kosher without the ptzimin, without the uprights, on which we have them close to one another with lavud? Why would Abaye say that's good? Because Amar Pitikr Yor v'Soseim, just like Rav. Maybe Rav was the precedent for the sheet of Abaye. The Rava Amar Psula, Rava who says that no, without the ptzimin, without these uprights that are within 3 tfachim of one another, that this sukkah is not kosher. Lo Amar Pitikr Yor v'Soseim, Lema Abaye ki Rava, Rava ki Shmuel. It's perfect. It's a perfect match that Abaye and Rava seem to be following the sheets of Rav and Shmuel. Says the Gemara, absolutely not. No way. Aliba de Shmuel, within the camp of Shmuel, Kule Alma Lo Pligi, that the sukkah would be puzzle. Ki pligi, where would there be the argument of Abaye and Rava? Only within Rav, Aliba de Rav. Abaye does agree with Rav, and Rava says it depends. The Rava, Ad kan lo ka'amar Rav hasam ela dahani mechitzos la'achsadra avidi. Where was Rav lenient? Rav allowed for those walls to be walls only when its use was for the achsadra, but not for a sukkah. There, even though conceptually the wall should work, but Rav would not allow the application of Pitikr Yor v'Soseim in that case. Because they weren't made for that purpose. The achsadra wasn't made to be a sukkah, therefore the walls cannot be used for a sukkah. Lo, therefore Rava would not agree with Rav in that case. So therefore Abaye and Rava agree within the camp of Shmuel. Had Shmuel been right, then Abaye and Rava would agree, and within Rav they are split. We'll stop here at the 2 dots, 1/3 of the way down on Sadi Hey Amid Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.